Kia ora koutou, g'day everyone. Thank you for coming along. We've just received news that in the search for the missing firefighter that a body has been located, yet to be identified. Nevertheless, our deepest condolences to the family, to the community, and of course to all volunteers in emergency services. This is no doubt will hit hard. As you'll be aware, Cyclone Gabrielle has moved off the coast of New Zealand, which means we, thankfully, are through the worst of the storm. But we're not out of danger yet. Sadly, we've lost 2 lives, both in the Hawke's Bay. This is incredibly upsetting for everyone involved, and my thoughts are with the family and friends as they face this tragic loss. My thoughts are also with the entire Hawke's Bay community and the first responders who are on the scene. Our emergency services are still carrying out rescues and land searches in a number of places. Yesterday, north of 300 people were rescued in Hawke's Bay and are currently being cared for at civil defence centres. There was one large building with 60 people stranded on the roof, and all have been rescued. The Rescue Coordination Centre have 25 remaining tasks of individual or family groups that require rescuing, and they are working through. These have been triaged, and there are 12 helicopters undertaking the rescues. Emergency services are confident they will complete this task today, and there are no further calls coming through regarding rescues in Hawke's Bay. Evacuations are currently underway in Hawke's Bay as flooding continues. At this stage, we're estimating that 9,000 people have been displaced and Wairoa remains cut off, but NEMA has been able to communicate with the local CDEM group via satellite phone, and NEMA personnel are en route to fly over Wairoa today to assess the damage. Our focus today is to get a firm grasp of the needs of affected communities across the country. We're confident that we'll be able to provide the resource required, but we need to know what that is. We're utilising all options to get a full assessment of the impact of the cyclone, especially areas where comms are limited. Spark and Vodafone are choppering connection supplies to Gisborne today, so I'm hopeful we'll be able to re-establish connection as soon as possible. This morning I've spoken to the mayors of Gisborne, Hastings, Central Hawke's Bay and Tararua. I've been unable to speak to the mayors of Napier and Wairoa, although I have had a message from the mayor indirectly through Civil Defence outlining what they need. NEMA has that message and are working on that now. The other mayors know they only need to tell us what they need, and we will work to provide it. My key message to everyone remains the same. Safety first. Look after yourself and your families. Everyone knows we have a long path ahead of us as we deal with extensive damage to homes, businesses, roads and bridges, and other fundamental parts of our infrastructure. This is a significant disaster, and it is going to take many weeks for those areas most affected to recover. I can assure everyone that the government is fully committed to supporting our communities. How we respond to a disaster like this is vital, but the recovery is just as important, and we're in this for the long haul. I'll hand over to Minister Little to give an update on the Defence Force.
Kia ora tātou katoa, good morning everybody. Can I also first begin by expressing my condolences to the family and workmates and those in the community of the volunteer firefighter whose body has been located this morning. Can I also acknowledge too also just the incredibly challenging situation that many families and communities are facing right now across the top half of the North Island and the East Coast, and just know that their needs are in our thoughts at all times. Can I also acknowledge, as I'm about to give an account of the contribution of New Zealand Defence Force personnel, of the incredible work that each and every one of them is doing to contribute, whether to their communities or having been deployed from their usual place of home and work, to help out in this very important response. So in terms of New Zealand Defence Force contribution to the response, there is now more than 250 personnel from across all 3 services, the Royal New Zealand Navy, the New Zealand Army and the Royal New Zealand Air Force, deployed to assist in responding to the consequences of the cyclone. 4 NH90 helicopters, 1 in Northland and 3 in Hawke's Bay, are being utilised, and a 5th will be available for deployment in the next day or two. 1 Sea Sprite helicopter is in action, and today has been tasked with a surveillance flight across Coromandel and the Bay of Plenty. As Minister McAnulty indicated, a C-130 Hercules transport aircraft is also in use, and that will be doing a reconnaissance flight over Tairāwhiti and the top bit of the Hawke's Bay. The HMNZS Manawanui is getting ready to be deployed from Devonport Naval Base to go to Napier once the needs, the provisions that are needed in that area are known and loaded onto Manawanui. It will set sail. It is expected to be in Napier at some point tomorrow. There are a number of trucks, unimogs and other vehicles in use across Northland, Bay of Plenty, Tairāwhiti and Hawke's Bay. An additional convoy of trucks and more than 100 personnel are leaving Linton today to be deployed into the Hawke's Bay to assist there. The NH90s in Hawke's Bay have been involved in a number of rescues, including of people off their roofs, and in addition to about 200 people who have been rescued, about 5 dogs have also been rescued as well. As I said, in Hawke's Bay we have 3 those helicopters who are there available to be deployed today, and working closely with NEMA and the other emergency response team for their deployment. And those other assets I referred to are getting ready for deployment as well. So once again, just extend my thanks to all the New Zealand Defence Force personnel who are involved. Many more are on short standby now for deployment from bases across the country, as they also will end up relieving those who are currently in service. And to everybody in those communities, know that support and assistance is available, and the Defence Force, in conjunction with NEMA, is working very hard to make sure those needs are met. Thank you.
From the briefings that you've had, are you expecting the death toll in Hawke's Bay in particular to rise?
It wouldn't surprise me, but I can't say that there's an expectation. This has been a serious event. There are still rescues to happen. Obviously, we hope that that doesn't happen, but this is a serious event that's already led to 2 deaths.
One of the things that you said yesterday, places you were really concerned about, was Wairoa. Have you managed to get any more information out of that community? Yes,
so there has been a clear link with communication between NEMA and the local civil defence. Power is back on in Wairoa to a large degree. There are 2 evacuation centres, the War Memorial Hall and the Presbyterian Hall. Wairoa College is there as a backup as well, and FENS and police have regular communication. So we're in a much better position than we were yesterday. Uncertainty causes anxiety and concern, but we still don't have a full grasp of the situation there, because we want to have people on the ground, and that's happening as we speak.
There's a bit more detail about some of the efforts to restore power, water. Tairua Civil Defence saying that they have maybe an hour of water left. What's happening with those communities, and can you just give us a bit more detail and any messages to people about what they might need to do or what you want them to do?
Well, as a general rule, local civil defence, who are the most in touch with their local communities, know that they just need to let NEMA know their concerns and what they need. We're confident we have the resources and ability to get them what they need, in particular basic provisions to get them over the next wee while. I've heard those concerns coming from Coromandel and other isolated communities like Tairāwhiti. They are fed straight into NEMA. While I was down in the bunker earlier, there are people working on solutions to that to get those basic provisions to those isolated towns.
Minister, at the moment, what are the areas that are the hot spots, if you like, or areas of concern for you with perhaps no communication and power issues? Where's the focus of your attention at the moment?
Well, the honest answer is they're all of concern, but they're all of concern for different reasons. So we've got Coromandel, for example, with the roading networks being decimated in many isolated communities. the supplies are there, but it's difficult to get them in, so we just need to find ways to do that. Tairawhiti, it's a relief that most of the power's been restored to Gisborne. When I was speaking to the Mayor, she did feel confident that with the airport being now cleared that we can get Defence Force planes in there with supplies. She's really stressing that she wants to get the message out to preserve water. She's confident that with power coming back on, that will mean that people can get supplies, but the broader Tairawhiti area remains of concern. We've obviously got ongoing operations in Hawke's Bay at the moment that are of concern. I want to know exactly what's happening in Wairua, what they need, and get them what they need as well. And then that doesn't even touch on Northland with the huge power cuts up there and the effect that it's in particular having on the rural community. So every area has their own areas of concern. What does reassure me is that NEMA is aware of those and work is actively being underway to get them what they need.
There is a lot of speculation around possible fatalities. What's the message to people out there at the moment, you know, perhaps with social media and things like that? What would you like to tell communities at the moment?
Well, we should always work on official information. We should always act on official advice and keep track of those official communication channels. But I do recognise that there are challenges in many areas because comms is very much limited. There are some areas where they don't have power and they don't have a local comms network, and that causes a lot of anxiety to people outside of those areas, be they in New Zealand or on the other side of the world that want to contact those loved ones. What I would say is that whilst they might not be able to contact them, please rest assured that those on the ground, civil defence personnel being supported by NEMA, Defence Force and other agencies, they have a good grasp of where the need is in their community. They are contacting people that are in need and they're looking after them.
Communities who haven't had any contact, are there any communities that you're aware of that haven't had any official contact or haven't been able to be reached?
There are certainly isolated communities, but that's not unusual in a response. And each area has a way in which to connect to those. Some rural communities that are prone to being isolated, for example, may have a radio system that they can link back to the civil defence outpost. Roger's here. I don't know if you've got any specifics there.
I can add a comment. Thanks, Minister. Yes, as the Minister says, I mean, it's quite likely and expected that there will be some isolated pockets around. But as the Minister also noted, in places such as Tairawhiti, there are very well-established community networks which are set up by civil defence, and sometimes they're under slightly different banners in those rural areas, and they have a responsibility to connect in with each other, check on the neighbours, assemble at the marae, help feed each other. So there are talking to the Tairawhiti ECC this morning, for example, they were feeling quite comfortable that that network is mobilised in their region, for example, and making sure that people are safe.
As far as you're aware, there's some kind of connection to these communities in whatever form that might be around in the different circumstances?
Well, look, we don't know what we don't know, but one of the things that we've seen in communities from Northland through to Tairawhiti and other places is the community response plans and the community response groups have mobilised and done exactly what we've asked of them, previously, which is activate your plans. Don't just look after your own household. Reach out to the neighbours in the street or the people over in the neighbouring valley, and we're seeing a lot of that in this event.
200 people who have been rescued. Do we have any update on their health status? Are they doing okay?
Yes, they have been assessed medically. Those that have required hospital treatment have gone straight to hospital. Those that have required less severe treatment, I guess you could say, have been able to receive that at the evacuation centres. As far as I'm aware, everyone that's been rescued, their needs have been met medically and otherwise.
Have you had that update on the health update on potential injuries, and are there any type of injuries that you're seeing come through that people may not be aware of, like out in the rural areas?
Well, I asked that question since we had that conversation this morning, and I haven't had any information to suggest that there are people that have injuries that aren't getting the treatment they need.
What about how many injuries are there?
I haven't got a number, no, but just to Roger's point earlier is that through those local networks they're able to connect to the more rural and isolated areas and identify if there is people that need immediate assistance.
And just on what you were saying on some of the roads being a bit movable, should people be more aware of that? How will they know if those roads are dangerous to go if there's
Well, if it's a local road, the local councils will be surveying those and declaring whether they're safe to pass or not. Obviously, if it's just for flood water, they will still assess whether a road is safe to pass. Just because a landslip has been cleared doesn't mean the road is safe. In many of these areas, particularly Coromandel and Tairāwhiti, but others as well, it's a very sodden area. The land continues to move, and whilst a road is there, it may not be safe, but if it's a state highway, that's Waka Kotahi's responsibility, and they're onto that. And if it's a local road, then the local councils are very proactive in that area.
Wairoa, you mentioned that power is back for a lot of people now. What about comms? Are you still just getting messages through in terms of satellite phones like it was last night, or is comms actually back for most people as well?
Comms is vastly improved from a civil defence perspective. I haven't been able to reach the Mayor. I've tried a couple of times today, so from my own experience, the mobile networks aren't back up and running. But if power is restored now, and we've got NEMA personnel on the way, I've been speaking to people from Defence Forces and NEMA this morning, and it's their intention to get additional communication technology to Wairoa today. So I'm hoping that would make a significant difference.
So just over 9,000 displaced people, which is quite a jump from, I think the estimate was 2,500 yesterday. Have you got a regional split for that? Is that Hawke's Bay and Tairāwhiti? Do you know the numbers on that one?
That number that I had, 9,000, is Hawke's Bay itself, isn't it?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
Hawke's Bay.
Yeah. So that's quite significant.
So is there displaced in Tairāwhiti, Northland, other places as well, or have you just got the figure for Hawke's Bay?
We do have figures for other regions as well. Yesterday it was 2,500 was the rough estimate for displaced people, and I've not been informed of any significant increase in Tairāwhiti on top of what we announced yesterday.
Okay, so if the 9,000 is Hawke's Bay, are we adding the 2,500 to that, or what's the actual
There was 1,000
figure?
within that 2,500 from yesterday that were estimated to be in Hawke's Bay, so you can therefore take that to be roughly 10,500.
Thank you.
Just a question for the Defence Minister. The NZDF has had pretty well documented issues with attrition rates. What effect has that had, if any, on their work in relation to the cyclone?
They have deployed as many as people as needed and as required. The way they deploy is NEMA consults with them or the local sort of civil defence response, their particular tasks that they need assistance with, and NZDF can assist. NZDF works up the equipment, the personnel to go with that, and they've met every request so far. So this is a big deployment for our total NZDF. But this is a big disaster, but they're responding to the requests as they're made.
Have there been any issues when it comes to the need to rotate personnel out? Have you got enough sort of covering the shift rotation, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, as I indicated yesterday, in addition to those who are deployed at the moment, there are several hundred available for deployment as those currently in service are rotated out to spell them. So I'm confident, and NZDF is confident, that we will continue to meet the requests made of them.
How long are you expecting the rescue operations to be continuing? How much longer are people going to have to wait to be rescued?
Well, going on the information that I've received from NEMA, we're hoping that the rescue part of that will be completed today. And so obviously, as the need arises, we act to that. There are 12 helicopters operating in Hawke's Bay alone looking to rescue people. There's 25 jobs outstanding of individual or family members. So given the number of helicopters, it does take a bit of time sometimes depending on the circumstances, but that does give us confidence that it'll be completed relatively soon.
25 people still missing, or
25 remaining tasks. So that's individuals or family groups that require rescuing. That might not require rescuing by air, but obviously they are in a position where they don't feel it's safe to be at home, and they've requested assistance.
Obviously there's a focus, and I understand the immediate focus on the response and then the clean-up, but can you talk briefly to flood adaptation? Has this focused the minds of politicians in terms of bringing some of that work forward and a greater urgency with what you had been looking at?
Well, it was already being treated as a priority, but as you know, it's not the sort of thing that gets broad support across politics. To your specific question around does it sharpen the mind, I hope so.
And what does that mean in terms of, you know, when we're through this point, what are you going to do in terms of that work, climate change, flood adaptation, and potentially bringing in, I suppose, other parties and using the momentum that this might have created?
I've been encouraged by the comments from other parties around how this needs to be treated as a priority, but I'm not in a position to give you specifics now. My focus is on the response, but I'm absolutely certain that that'll be a conversation we'll be having soon.
Just a bit more of a specific question about communities who may be short of either food or water. How does the process work to get food and water in there, and how is it distributed? Where does it come from? How's it brought in? Where can people get it? How does
Well,
that work?
the benefit of a state of national emergency is that it allows for that central coordination, and we want that process to be as streamlined and straightforward as possible. Ideally, it would be that the local civil defence crews identify the need, they communicate that to NEMA. NEMA finds the most efficient way of delivering that. It might be through a Defence Force flight with water to an isolated community, or food if that's what they need. That was in place yesterday with the Napier Medical Centre when the Defence Force gave them medications as they were running short. They were the only shop in town at one time. And so that's how ideally we want it to work, as streamlined as possible.
So if you're in a local area running low on food, there's no supermarkets open, the local civil defence will be putting out alert, going through their network saying here's where to go to get what you need.
They also, it's also not a case of waiting to that point. They're planning ahead. They're giving regular feedback. We believe we've got 5 days provisions at the moment, or 2 days, or whatever. All that information is being fed back through civil defence. It's not on the individual necessarily to make that. It's on the local civil defence teams who continue to lead their response in their communities to assess the need and then feed that back to NEMA.
Minister, from what you've seen and heard from communities, what kind of impact has forestry had, on affecting infrastructure, and how much is that due to the forestry industry as a whole, and just this kind of climate event?
There's no doubt that slash in some areas is causing an unneeded addition to the weather event, and that has been a long-standing issue for Tairāwhiti in particular. But I'll be honest, that there hasn't been a weather event that included flooding that hasn't had slash to some degree involved. The Prime Minister indicated yesterday that's something that he is committed to addressing, and I welcome those comments as Minister of Rural Communities in particular.
Responsibility does it fall on? I mean, we've heard some really anguished people dealing with not just the flood, but the impact of logs and sediment coming down. I mean, who takes responsibility, because this is not a new issue, and then actually does something about it?
Well, the Minister of Forestry has indicated himself that he's got a bit of work underway. I'd imagine that he's the natural lead, but not only as Minister of Emergency Management, but also Minister of Rural Communities. And I suppose you could chuck in local government in there. This is an area that I'm particularly interested in. It's clearly an area of concern, and like the Prime Minister said yesterday.
What commitment are you giving them to actually do something about it? Because we've heard commitments over the years, and look at what these people have been.
Yeah, I'm not even going to try and pretend that it's not a problem, and that it's not a problem that they haven't faced for ages. I welcome the Prime Minister's comments yesterday that this is something he's committed to sorting out. Whether that's through an inquiry or what, that remains to be seen. I won't be the lead minister, but I will be taking a very keen interest in that.
Minister Little, is the Defence Force's role over, as we face climate disasters like this, are they going to have to pick up more of a role of civil defence effectively?
Well, one of the responsibilities is in civil emergencies like this is to be available, working with NEMA and other authorities to be able to respond. And they do that around the Pacific Islands when there are cyclones hit there. They do it for New Zealand as well. So it is part of their kind of core competency, is to be equipped and able to respond in the way that they are doing.
What support is there for farmers, either financial or otherwise, who are affected by this?
So when an adverse event is declared by the Minister of Agriculture in consultation with myself, that provides direct funding to rural support trusts to assist farmers directly, and that also triggers some measures within IRD to provide a fair bit of flexibility to farmers around their obligations there. But obviously that this event in particular has had significant impacts on rural communities, And so MPI is doing a lot of work liaising with rural areas, especially those farmers that have been cut off from power. It brings animal welfare issues into the fray, especially those that haven't been able to milk for a couple of days. And also a close consultation with the likes of Fonterra and other milk companies around what support they can provide their members. That's an ongoing brief, that one. We're looking at what support we might be able to provide.
Minister, you've had a lot filtering in through your office across your desk over the last few days. Is there a story or a scenario that stood out for you of something that's happened that's kind of stuck with you of all the things that are happening?
I think the thing that's hit me the hardest, if I'm going to be completely upfront with you, is the volunteer firefighter getting trapped. We rely on volunteer firefighters. Every community in the country relies on them, and when they respond to a natural weather event, it's in their own patch, so they're leaving their own home and their own family to help others. And that's just an absolute tragedy. It's going to hurt a lot of people.
Did your heart sink when you heard the news that the body had been found just before you came in?
Yes. I literally just heard while we were walking here.
Just on the beehive bunker, it was mentioned yesterday we might be looking to the sort of wider public sector to sort of staff it properly. Do we have enough sort of specialty crisis staff, considering it's been running, I think, 19 days on the trot now? What's the sort of pressures there?
I have absolutely no concerns about the ability of people to perform those roles. They're hugely committed and dedicated, but we've got Roger here, so he can speak to specifics.
Thanks, Minister. Well, look, obviously, when we have events like this, it outstrips our business as usual resources. The organisation I work for, which is NEMA, only has about 160, 170 staff. So the model is based around reaching out to other agencies and surging in. And we've seen this happen through the COVID response. We've seen it happen in other natural disaster events such as, Kaikoura and the Canterbury earthquake. So, we feel we're getting what we need. But are we stretched? Yes, for sure. It's a big event for New Zealand.
How tired are people at the moment, or is there a lot of fatigue at the moment?
I would say that fatigue management is certainly one of the top things in terms of our sort of internal management of the operation. And it's not just about what's happening here in our bunker facility. I know that the staff in Auckland, for example, have been running for a couple of weeks now, more than a couple of weeks, and they're also having the challenge of managing, surge, bringing in staff from outside in order to give their own team a rest.
Did Hawke's Bay kind of blindside you guys?
I think the cyclone took everyone by surprise to the extent that it affected Hawke's Bay. I was speaking to local elected officials up in Hawke's Bay the night before they declared, and they felt comfortable that things were in place. They've got a really proactive and really well organised civil defence team up there, and they would have been watching the weather closely, looking at models, comparing it to previous events. There was nothing to indicate to them that the amount of rain that they were going to experience overnight was coming. And then at 5:30 in the morning, I had a notification that things were very bad in Hawke's Bay, and that was fed straight back through. Not too dissimilar to Auckland, not too dissimilar to the Nelson event, where the rain that came was more than forecast. But like I say, they've done a tremendous job up there in incredibly challenging circumstances in weather that prevented them from doing what they wanted to do and rescue people.
Is NEMA asking for any particular donations for the people who've been stuck, like SIM cards or
I'm really sorry, I missed the start of that question.
Is NEMA asking for any particular donations for the people who are stuck or trapped, or torches, radios, anything like that?
Not NEMA specifically. I'm aware of some community groups and organisations like the Red Cross and all those sorts of things that focus on that sort of stuff. NEMA at the moment is concentrating on ensuring that the needs of each civil defence area, each community is met through the avenues it has available all across government.
What is the worst case scenario sort of for today and maybe tomorrow, and when do we move to the recovery phase?
The first focus is the emergency response. So we need to make sure that those that require rescuing are rescued, and I'm really optimistic and quite reassured that that'll be done relatively soon. The next stage will be ensuring that those communities, particularly the isolated ones, be they isolated geographically because their road is not passable or through communications, gets the needs that they need straight away until we can reconnect them, either through communications or through road. Then we focus on recovery and welfare. We've got each region's at a different stage. You'll note that Bay of Plenty have stood down their civil defence centre there, so they're already in the recovery phase. Auckland is more closely aligned with recovery than others, and we've still got an emergency response in Hawke's Bay at the moment. So there's varying degrees and varying stages.
Defence Force Minister be involved in the clean-up, the reconstruction at all?
Well, as we saw with the aftermath of the Auckland event a couple of weeks ago, they were definitely involved in the clean-up and assisted there. I expect they will be available to be tasked for that. In the end, NZDF's role, the role of their personnel in situations like this is to work with NEMA, and as long as NEMA is engaged and involved, NZDF is available to be deployed accordingly.
And there's already planning underway as to allocating resources to assist with the clean-up and the rebuild. We don't wait for the response stage finished before we start thinking about the recovery. There are teams focused on that and are already planning away, and that includes liaising with our Australian counterparts as well to see what support might be available.
I know far too early for this, but as planning is underway for rebuild and recovery, has a single dollar figure come up at all? Do we know how much it's going to cost?
I don't think we'll know for some time. I'll use a previous response as an example. The Marlborough Rain event that happened last year, 12 months after their previous event, we knew that one that happened 2 years ago did $85 million worth of damage to the roads. Such was the extent of the damage and how sodden the ground was and how long the ground kept moving. They still haven't finished the assessment of the damage to their roading network. It takes a long time. And so we won't really get a full answer as to how the total cost of this cyclone to the various communities that are affected for quite some time. We do know that it's not going to be cheap, and we do know that it's not going to be fixed quickly.
Are you expecting any problems with insurance? I mean, they're going to obviously have a big role after Auckland and with this. Are there any conversations with the industry about them stepping up as well?
I'm meeting with some insurance providers later today, so I'm looking forward to that conversation, just to hear what plans they have in place and what their intentions are. Happy to report back after that.
Messages be to the insurance industry, to those insurance
My intention is to hear what they've got to say, what their understanding of the situation is, how they are placed, what they intend to do with severe weather events moving forward. I'm conscious that insurance isn't necessarily under my portfolio, but it's very much relevant to it, because every time we have a severe weather event, livelihoods, their homes are affected, they rely on insurance to rebuild, so I want to get a bit of a grasp of what they're
are they left with it?
I'm not sure that that's a question that I can answer, but in terms of a sense of what we're at, we certainly have that with Auckland. I think it's too early to say for the other regions. We're still in that response phase.
9,000 people being displaced in Hawke's Bay. Where are you going to put them?
Well, they have civil defence centres and evacuation centres set up, and they're setting them up as the need arises. There was an active evacuation underway in Hawke's Bay this morning, and they were setting up centres to house those people as well. The need will be met. It's a massive ask for that region, but by declaring a national state of emergency, we can give them the resources they need much sooner. Go for it.
Yes, I might just return to that question as well. From my point of view, I mean, I think we need to understand that number of 9,000 in a little bit more detail. It could be quite possible that those people, having been initially displaced, might receive an all clear to get back and be able to get back into their own homes. Many of them will go to friends and family, of course, and so we just need to sort of see how that plays out over the next 24 hours.
Then of what the numbers might be for permanent displacement, destroyed, like they are out of their home?
The assessment of the buildings in those areas where emergency rescues are still happening hasn't happened yet. We've got pretty firm numbers for Auckland now. We've got numbers dribbling in for Coromandel and Tairāwhiti, but it wouldn't be a clear picture as to what the total extent of disruption is, similar to Hawke's Bay. But Roger makes a really important point that we have an idea of how many people have been asked to evacuate or have self-evacuated or have been rescued, but it's not a running tally. So when people go back home, we don't keep that. But we might try and get that information for you to give you a bit of a sense as to how things are going.
You said that you wouldn't be you wouldn't be surprised if the death toll rises. Are you worried that the death toll could escalate reasonably significantly, considering the difficulty in getting on the ground?
I just want to be really clear. It's not an expectation. It's just a concern that I constantly hold. We're talking about a massive, unprecedented weather event that is already likely to have claimed at least 2 lives in Hawke's Bay alone, and there are rescue operations underway. That is something that plays on all of our minds. Obviously, we want first and foremost to make sure people are safe and comfortable, and while operations are still underway, that's definitely playing at the back of my mind.
Yesterday there were 41 supermarkets that were closed, and the Prime Minister's understanding was that where medical centres and hospitals have been impacted, they were managing to move and use people in other places. Have you had any updates on those 2 numbers?
No, not specifically. I've been speaking to Dr. Duncan Webb quite a bit. He's in close contact with both main supermarket chains, and I've been quite impressed with what he's been feeding back to me about how proactive they've been around trying to get provisions to supermarkets that are open and isolated, or trying to get those supermarkets that are impacted by a loss of power or currently closed back up and running. Alternatively, if they can't do that, then it comes to looking sure that we get those basic provisions to those communities. I think I'm getting the eye, so we might just take one more if that's all right.
Do you have an estimate of how many households across the country don't have power?
So it was approximately 225,000 yesterday. The latest update that I had this morning, I'm expecting a more accurate one soon, but the most up-to-date numbers I have are 144,000. So that's significant progress, but it's still a lot of people without power. And so that continues to be a priority. There's a number of things underway to try and assist that, try and give support to local lines companies, and also look at what alternatives we can do to the communication network that relies on power and would otherwise be operating if it wasn't for the power cut. And there's a lot of work underway, and I believe that there's going to be an update later today on specifics on that.
Just a question about Marae on 2 fronts.
Yep.
There are a number of opened their doors to provide support and aid. So is the government providing any resources or aid directly to Marae to then distribute? And also a number of Marae have been affected by the floods. So yes. What support will they receive?
We always see that usually the first people outside of a formal civil defence response to open their doors to look after their community is Marae. And so there's an emergency management bill that was drafted that will be introduced at some stage, and you'll see in that recognition of that role in a recovery and a response phase. They do get support through NEMA and local civil defence because they are doing work on behalf of the whole community, but I can't speak to specifics in the current response as to who's been getting what support. All right, thank you very much.